Tell me, do we have time for another number?
Oh, I think so, Jimmy. What tune do you have in mind?
Welcome back, listeners, to this episode of Drinking Matters. My name is Bryan, and with me, first-time guest, great friend of mine. We haven't had the chance to hang out as much, and I kind of miss it, Dom.
No,
we need
we
our
haven't.
drinks. My friend Dom, how's it going?
Hey, Bryan. It's going okay. I mean, with everything going on, it's just kind of like managing through and everything, but we will touch on that.
We will. We'll talk.
yeah,
We'll
yeah.
talk more. But thank you, Dom, for coming in on this episode of Drinking Matters. Really appreciate you. We've been planning this for about a week now, I would say, right?
Yeah, about a week, a couple weeks. And it's been something that's kind of like I've been looking forward to the past week,
Uh-huh.
because like the topic that we're about to discuss is something that I'm very passionate about, and like my hopeful career aspirations is to talk more about what we're about to discuss. So,
Gotcha.
just preparation for the future.
Perfect. So before we move on to the topic at hand, do you care to introduce yourself real quick, like what it is that you do, what your aspirations are, before we move on, so that way we kind of get a clear picture?
Yeah, so my name's Dominic. I am, my background is in neurobiology and biological sciences. Right now, I'm working full time as a lab assistant in one of the research labs here at UC Irvine, particularly focused on Alzheimer's disease and trying to create new generations and new breeds of um, mice that can model the disease.
Okay, excellent. And then aspiration-wise, you said that you want to go into.
Yeah, so aspiration-wise, hopefully, like I'm hoping to reapply to some PhD programs, that we can get some training in to really talk about neuroscientific research, especially as it pertains to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And this field is under the umbrella of science communication. I've been trying to get into science writing opportunities. I have a freelance blog that I kind of write in about every other month or so. So yeah, I mean, the topic at hand is literacy. So this is really relevant to something that I've
It
talked
is,
about in the
and
past.
we've talked about this before when we used to. This was like what, couple of months. This was last year. Last time that we hung out before
yeah.
everything.
Last
We talked
year.
about this when we went to go out for drinks, and we discussed pretty much what health literacy and science literacy means to us and what we think of it. It's a topic I've somewhat studied because my undergrad was done. It's health sciences essentially, and they want us to learn pretty much how to read journals, how to do research papers, and then how to distribute that information to the public in a way that's understandable to everyone else. And then you
Right.
had your takes on it, and I think we had like a good 2 hour conversation, just pretty
Oh yeah,
much,
it was really great.
yeah,
I missed that.
yeah.
I missed that, dude.
So we'll go into that. We'll go into
Yeah.
that with that
Yeah.
episode. But before we go on, it's tradition on the show pretty much to drink as we talk. So for you, Dom, I pulled out my scotch
Nice.
right
I
here.
feel
So
appreciated. Thank you so much for that.
so before we go on, cheers, Dom. Cheers.
Cheers. I have some stuff that I picked up from Trader Joe's. It's a mango cart from Golden Road. And I think you mentioned
Uh-huh.
last year, you mentioned Belching Beaver. So I have that as well.
There we go. Perfect. Cheers, Dom. Let's go ahead and start. So for those that are listening to this episode, actually, we're doing two things. We are IG living this pretty much episode. So we're
Attempting
streaming
to,
this.
at least.
We're streaming this on Friday, on June 19th.
June 19th. Yes.
But this episode will actually premiere on my YouTube channel next week, next Friday. So if you guys care to re-listen to the whole episode, I'll go ahead and post. The link is on my bio, so you can go ahead and check out the YouTube channel, and that episode will be posted up there. I kind of like this idea, though, live streaming the episode
no, I
before
mean, I'm just trying to like hopefully
brought it up.
expand my thing. Yeah,
it
because
was a good idea. I think I enjoyed it. It's pretty cool. So if you guys are joining on IG Live, welcome. Thank you guys for tuning in. You guys want to comment and say
appreciate the
anything?
support.
Yeah, bring it on. Bring it on. We'll go ahead and bring up any questions that you guys have. But let's go on. Topic at hand: health and science literacy.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and ask this question: does health literacy exist?
Yeah, I think so. In the same way that someone can be knowledgeable of like cars or of um, any other sciences, you have a sort of awareness of things um, such as health.
Hmm.
And I remember because I was listening to your previous episode on this, and you mentioned that science literacy was more of the methodological
Hmm.
aspects of sciences. So, like how to read journals, how the scientific process works, how the statistics work, how people know the things they know.
Hmm.
And whereas health literacy is more gear oriented or goal oriented.
Hmm.
So you have, like you mentioned, diabetes. You want to communicate risks of diabetes and the uh, stuff that can lead to um, the onset of diabetes. So
Hmm.
yeah, in the same way that someone can be knowledgeable of cars, of plants, of space, people can be knowledgeable of health, and that varies between populations.
Gotcha. Okay, so pretty much there's an agreement that health literacy and science literacy, two separate fields, right? That there's an
Yeah.
evidence that there's a
Yes.
difference there.
Yeah, I
Now,
usually consider science literacy as sort of like the umbrella, and then inside that you have different aspects of literacy. So you have health, um,
what was that thing called in biology where they teach you about like the different families and genomes and stuff like that? Do you remember what it was?
phylogenetic tree.
Yeah, that there you go, there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
like
Okay, okay.
immediately as soon as you said umbrella, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that I actually
Yeah,
studied in
yeah,
biology. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's one way of putting it right there.
Hmm.
Now, is
Um,
there? Yes, we're gonna say something.
yeah. So actually, so I actually want to hear your take on this because the way you've been talking about health literacy
Hmm.
is, I think, one way to also frame it is it's a part of risk communication
Hmm.
because you can be health literate, but it's another thing also if you're just going to be communicating risk, then you can also communicate the risk of climate change, for
Hmm.
example. And there's that part of literacy there. So I think definitely the main point that I think you drove in the previous episode is that the differences was that science literacy was just kind of like general, like you said, but health literacy is more goal oriented. So there's a goal, there's initiative to this.
So, kind of to expand on what I was saying beforehand, it's like when I think of science literacy, I think of how can you essentially give out the information that's found in journals to the public.
Right.
So when I look at a scientific journal, you have a different setup than something like a health article, for
Hmm.
example, right?
No, for
So in
sure.
front of me, I have a journal, just to kind of because dude, I'm so rusty. It's been almost I think like 2 years since I've
Oh yeah,
actually
it's
looked at a
it's like
scientific journal.
it's a muscle. You gotta
Yeah,
just somehow
you gotta
work that.
readjust it. But
Yeah.
in my undergrad, I would have to read these to do research papers and stuff like that. But when you look at a scientific journal, it's written out in a way that's kind of confusing if you haven't trained yourself to look at what you're
Yeah.
supposed to look at. You have
No,
your
for sure.
introductions, you have your methods, which is kind of the overview of pretty much who's in it, the different variables, the reviews, the procedures of the experiment, so on and so
Yeah,
forth,
yeah,
statistical analysis. Then you have your results, which is pretty much just kind of giving you every detailed result
yeah.
of your experimentation.
Hmm.
And that goes into pretty much every point from errors to what those errors mean, the actual results that you want to find,
Hmm.
any surprise results, things like that. And then the discussion portion, which is pretty much just explaining every aspect of the experiment from
Right.
things that went well, why you picked those variables in there, and even why you think the errors existed.
Hmm.
And then I think there's like a
Yes.
conclusion. Yeah, the conclusion, which is like basically the overall summary of
Oh
that.
yeah.
But
And no, yeah, so that's great because and that's one of the barriers that kind of prevent the public from having access to this sort of information is
mm-hmm,
that the structure of scientific articles are so rigid.
mm-hmm,
Like it's as if you have to be trained in the field to understand how to work your way through
mm-hmm,
reading such a journal. So if you want to make an analogy of this, it's like studying for the SAT or the GRE. Um, there's a certain way to go about this, but unless you like actually train yourself into it, there's no way that you can actually know all
yeah,
the tips and tricks to it.
it's you said it yourself in a perfect, a great way. I think it's a muscle. Like
Yeah.
you have to train yourself to know what you're looking for. You look at these journals and these journals try to explain the idea that you might agree on, that you might want to know more about.
Mm-hmm.
But then these journals are written out so that it not only explains the results that you want to, or that the results that you're looking for, but it's also giving you errors as well.
Right.
And unless you know how to depict or decipher those errors, they might be taken incorrectly. They might be discouraging you from going on. And so that's where science literacy comes. That's
Yeah.
where, my belief in science literacy comes in, is that these journals aren't necessarily meant for public consumption. When I think of
Mm-hmm.
science literacy, I think of how can you get those journals and write them in an article so that you can distribute the information
Right.
properly to the public. You don't need all the errors and all the data and all the variables and stuff like that. You can pretty much dilute it enough so that the public at, a basic reading level could pretty much read this and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
In terms of health literacy, there's a difference. And I think
No.
it's
Yeah.
the same thing. I think you explained it best when you said that science literacy is the umbrella and then the branching, it branches out. And that's where health literacy comes in,
Mm-hmm.
where health literacy is essentially how do you explain to the public the benefits of doing a certain
Yeah.
thing.
So
Because when it
basically,
comes,
just how to contextualize the
mm-hmm.
research findings into
Yeah,
something that the public can consume.
exactly. Because health research essentially, it doesn't go as in depth as other sciences when it
Right.
comes to things like psychological studies. In your
Mm-hmm.
field, neurobiology, you still have to
Right.
do a bunch of experimentation, and in health sciences, you don't. You're not looking at all these different errors and analyzing and all this stuff. You're looking at variables, but not to the extent that you guys are.
Right.
And so when you guys try to, or when health researchers essentially try to, put out that information out there, it's different. It's a lot
Yeah.
simpler, and you can kind of explain your findings to the public without diluting it as much. So
No.
there is a
No.
difference there.
I agree completely.
Now, next question that I have for you: is there an evident lack of science communication in the world?
Mm.
Is it evident? Because you could say yes, and you can also say no.
Okay, so I'm gonna say there isn't a lack of science communication in the world, but hold on.
Okay.
I'm just gonna clarify on this.
Okay.
You mentioned, and I agree completely with this point that you mentioned in the previous podcast, there's just so much information
Mm-hmm.
out in the internet now. And you mentioned people in social media are given platforms despite not deserving of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not necessarily a lack of science communication, it's more of just a lack of how to navigate through that. Because for me, like, I have complete faith in when I'm doing science writing, I have complete faith in my audience to like follow through as long as I'm doing a good job in making that language accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, one of the most prevalent misconceptions that the science community has in terms of science communication is what's known as the knowledge deficit model.
Mm-hmm.
That's the and just to simplify this, it's sort of like the idea that an uneducated public will comprehend science less,
Mm-hmm.
when really um, it's sort of like an equal playing field. Everyone kind of comprehends science because they have that ability to sort of understand it. It depends on the actual communicator who's trying to communicate the science. So, in terms of whether there's a lack of science communication, I think in the public there isn't, but I definitely think there is a lack of science communication in the science community, just coming from a scientist
Okay. So
perspective.
I want to backtrack to the point that you said first. You don't think that there is a lack of science communication, but there is a lack of proper methods to communicate to the
Yeah, yeah,
public
yeah. So
of what's going on.
there's so much science, and I'm doing air quotes here. You can't see it on the podcast, but science communication
The quotes.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's like it's well, there. Yeah, there's a lot of things to go into hand with terms how you consume science communication, um, and a lot to do with it is just the platform you're given.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, in terms of platforms, are you talking about individuals out there who are trying to communicate science or health to the public? Are you talking about those with a YouTube channel? Are you talking about those
No,
with
exactly. Yeah.
magazines or
So
blogs?
I would argue pretty much everyone, including the scientists who have these sort of avenues of social media as well, they all have um, a certain platform, and based on like their credentials, how they're reasoning, and usually how they talk about it,
Hmm.
um, sort of determines whether the audience can understand it or agree with it. And I think the importance part there is the agreement part,
Hmm.
um, because despite how much you can like um, talk about the science, if you can't get someone to agree with it to sell or market what you're saying to them,
Hmm.
then that kind of causes that disparities between understanding and engagement.
Do you think the platform matters? Because when I was doing my research papers, I would essentially consider how I would distribute my information.
Hmm.
So one of the classes that I took, it was a research class. It was a research, or it's a grant proposal class, pretty much. And in that one, there was a portion where essentially they wanted us to distribute the information out to the public, and they asked us, well, what avenues would you essentially take?
Hmm.
Would you take, an avenue where it would be something along the lines of flyers, or having seminars, or would you do presentations or videos and stuff like that? So, and for me, and my take on it is that I do think that platforms do matter. I think
Yes.
that when you try to reach out the different demographics, according to age or race or whatever it may be,
Hmm.
your platform of choice actually matters. So if you distribute, I don't know, let's say um, a health science article in a magazine, your
Hmm.
demographic is going to be far different than somebody's, or than distributing that same information
Yeah.
on a YouTube channel, for
Right.
example.
No, I completely agree. Like,
Yeah.
and sort of just back or sidetracking this, but you mentioned platform matters. I completely agree in terms of science communication. Like, whether you're engaging with people through Twitter, through TikTok, through Instagram, through YouTube, you will be reaching a certain demographic of people.
Hmm.
And I think that really just depends on your own personal goals with
Hmm.
this science communication media, whether you want, and trying to reach the specific demographic you had in mind. Like, for example, if you're someone who's trying to get young people into the scientific communities, get them excited about it, then you could go for more popular media that are popular amongst them, like TikTok or Instagram or Twitter.
Hmm.
If you're trying to talk to maybe the older generations, then perhaps magazines or newspapers or even news outlets might help.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, definitely platform matters, and it's sort of just a lot of it depends on you as the communicator and what you want to achieve, if that makes sense.
I don't know. Well, at least the way that I can relate to,
Right.
health and science.
Right.
Let's just stick with science communication and
Mm-hmm.
health, science literacy.
Yeah.
The way that I can relate to it is, as a child, I got into sciences because of Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Right.
And when you think of, and as silly as it may sound, it's kind of the gateway
Yeah.
to
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
finding interests in the sciences, because even though his show was very, I mean, it's a kids show, but
Yeah. Yeah.
even though it was very much simple sciences, it got you to understand why certain things were or
Right.
work the way they work,
It really just got your brain going and started
exactly.
thinking about things.
And
Yeah.
so
No, I agree.
it's that platform itself, through video,
Mm-hmm.
that's how you get the younger generation.
Yeah.
And so now, and I've seen this kind of in the science community, which is a little bit frustrating. I feel like the science community now expects younger generations to understand what is being said through platforms that they have no interest in.
Yeah.
When you look at this and say like, "Oh, well, how could you not know this? It's literally written on Time magazine and it's
Yeah.
online. You kids are always online, so why don't you,
Or if they like have a seminar and they
uh-huh.
expect the kids to come in, like no kid's gonna come to a
No
seminar.
kid's gonna sit through an
Yeah.
hour seminar to try
No.
to
No.
understand the benefits of whatever it is that they're trying to
Yeah.
explain. It's not what they want to do. Kids want to go outside and play, or they have short attention spans. So you want to
Right.
give them something that's maybe 10 to 15 minutes long, which is where YouTube comes in.
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar in regards to seeing what's going on with YouTube and what kind of science people or
Mm-hmm.
researchers are on there. Funny enough, I actually yesterday when I was taking a nap, my girlfriend was watching. I forget his name. I probably should look this up. And anything, I'll probably link it in the description below. But she was watching a doctor who was talking about the benefits of wearing a mask during the COVID pandemic,
Right.
and that's the kind of stuff that gets the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe our generation and younger to essentially want to know more about what's going on because it's on a platform that's easily accessible and easily maneuverable to younger people, and it's distributed in short bites.
No, I completely agree.
You know.
And one of the questions you actually had was, what can people do better to sort of um, improve health literacy and whatnot? And I definitely think that um, so the when people get like learn about this health literacy sort of thing, like I said, usually the misconception is that the public doesn't know enough. So let's just bombard them with more information, and they'll get it eventually. No,
Hmm.
like it's really up to the science communicators, the media, the government, big organizations like WHO, to really just sort of get lessons from the social sciences, the marketing um, people, just to see how they can better market their audience. Because, like, unfortunately, we live in an information age, I'm sure you know, where people consume information. And why not collaborate with or marketing individuals who know how to sell
Hmm.
products, and the product this here being health communication or health literacy.
Hmm. So I'm going to bring up a comment that one of the IG viewers, Riff Runner, thank you for watching, by the way. He says certain platforms are not open to research that opposes their views or findings. There's almost no accountability for being wrong, even in science and academia
Yeah.
now. I would kind of disagree. It,
Mm-hmm.
it depends. And the only reason why, and that comment is actually pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in regards to not having accountability for being wrong in the science community, I think that there is, and we'll get to it later because there is an
Yeah.
article. There is a thing that I will bring up,
No, 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 yeah.
and it will pretty much explain my position
Mm-hmm.
with all this going on. But I think that there, depending on the platform and how that information is distributed, you can have people be accountable for being incorrect. I wouldn't say
Right.
wrong, but probably saying, and the only reason why I'm
Or
saying
spreading
incorrect,
misinformation
yeah,
in whatever
misinformation.
way.
Thank you. That's the
Yeah.
correct word I'm looking for.
I know, yeah. So, like, as someone within the science community, like, I probably shouldn't say this, but like, I currently dealing with a similar situation where someone has been communicating a certain thing,
Hmm.
and like the past few months, my lab has been trying to replicate and reproduce it like a good science community should, but
Hmm.
unfortunately, we can't.
Hmm.
And other labs can't. So it's, yeah, in terms of holding people accountable within the science community, there's definitely that aspect
Well, there's a difference
being
because if you're
involved.
doing experimentation and then these individuals who are, in those experiments
Yeah.
are being proven incorrect by the results, the only thing that can hold them accountable are the results. You can
Yeah.
propose the experiment and keep replicating it over and over and over and over again, and if the results are consistent, then that's a disproven or that's a disproof
Mm,
of the hypothesis essentially, or
right.
the theory that
It's
exists out
just,
there.
it's really hard though, because especially if, oh crap,
Oh, the video on
sorry,
your
that was
side.
my
There you
phone. Yeah, yeah.
go.
Especially when you've been talking about this for years now, people, it's it gets messy.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of social media now, I know like Twitter is starting to hamper down now on misinformation.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know why they haven't done that before, but yeah,
It's a new
there's
era.
definitely, yeah,
It's a
there's
new
more
era.
accountability now.
Hmm.
I would even argue that um, I don't want to say cancel culture is something to praise, but I do appreciate the accountability aspect that um,
That's out there.
people, yeah,
Yeah. And so we'll get into the whole accountability thing.
yeah,
Accountability thing. But I just wanted to put it out there. It depends on what is going on that can hold people accountable. Like
hmm,
I said, you have scientists that are trying to replicate the experiment or replicate the results coming from an experiment. And if the
right,
results keep coming out negative, then that's a disproof on their theory. And
hmm,
you can easily say
yeah,
that. But you can't, as an individual, say you are incorrect
right,
of whatever theory you're proposing because they're being experimented on. You have
hmm,
to let those results prove them,
yeah,
prove them incorrect. You can hold other people accountable for putting statements out there that are
exactly,
contrary to what they've said.
yeah, and that's what we're dealing with right now,
Yes. So I don't know
because
if I
that
want to.
statement was out there.
Yeah.
Um, People started working on these, and they invested money towards these mice, and people have been working on this for years now. And now that we have like some results that say, oh, that might not be what we think it is, then yes, it definitely has detrimental effects in terms of the science community there.
So this is completely foreshadowing of
Yeah, yeah.
everything that's going to be going on, because we still got plenty to talk about. But the next question, regarding this whole thing, the next point, pretty much we've already discussed it, that scientific journals aren't essentially the correct avenue to distribute the information to the public, right?
Right.
So what is exactly in regards? I mean,
Hmm.
we essentially said, the platform pretty
Yeah.
much
So you
matters.
mentioned a great point that scientific journals are usually just for scientists.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, yeah, so it's just really knowing the platform that you're using is key in terms of um, this sort of topic. Like, what I usually tell people is sure, you can go to scientific journals, but usually you can try your best to look at perhaps review articles,
Hmm.
because usually review articles kind of simplify some of the information, and you collect a bunch of other articles that contextualize and support whatever it is the topic may be,
Hmm.
especially in health. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
So, review articles. That's one avenue that the
yeah,
public can essentially take to try to
hmm,
understand what's being distributed out there, right?
yeah.
But
Another thing
mhm.
too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off
no, go
again.
for it, go for it, go for it.
Um, no, but yeah, like I just started normalizing social media as a means of expanding your coverage of this.
Hmm.
Like, so one of the main issues here is that with science journals, for both journal articles and review articles, is that it's behind a paywall,
Hmm. Oh
right?
my God, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
not only is there an accessibility and or accessibility difficulty in the language, but you have to pay for it, hundreds of dollars
You
if it
just
for just
mentioned
a PDF.
paywall, and it hit me. I'm like, oh my God, yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
that was one
Oh,
thing that I feel like you should have mentioned in the past episode,
uh huh.
because yeah, like yes, the language is an issue, but if they can't access the actual PDF of the article, then it's makes it really difficult for people to really try to see these findings and see why the scientists are going about
I will.
um,
I'll
their
say this.
conclusions.
I think that I was a little bit ignorant because of the tools that were made available to me during my
Hmm.
undergrad.
Right.
As a student in any college, depending on
Yeah,
what school you go
like
to, you have these tools for free.
yes, you
You
have
can
this as
literally,
accessibility.
yeah, you don't have to pay for any of these things to essentially access that information. It's
Hmm.
literally there. You have your student ID and the library, and they have a buttload of, it's not like a professional word to use, but you have like a buttload of
No, 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 it's fine.
essential journals that are necessary
Yeah,
from different institutions. And you
but if
for
you're coming from the public, you don't have that information unless you go
no,
to these libraries.
yeah, and it's ridiculous. I
Yeah.
remember the thing that annoyed me so much about some of my professors at Long Beach was they would always praise that our what is it called? It's not a it's I forget what it was called. Um, the bank of journals that they essentially had. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
remember what it was called for
Database?
the thank you, the database.
Yeah, yeah.
So the database, they would always praise it and
Yeah,
say
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, we have one of the largest in all Cal states and then California and all this other stuff. And yeah, if anybody, like if the public tried to access it, it's like thousands and thousands of dollars. And in my head, I'm just like, why do you think that's a good idea? Like, how is blocking this stuff and saying that it's thousands and thousands of dollars worth of information is a good idea? You want
It's
to
a
make this
money-making scheme, to be quite honest.
it's like you
And
want to make that
yeah.
information public. You want to, and it's a good thing to do so.
Hmm.
So I was ignorant on that. I think that
Yeah.
that's my fault for not mentioning it in the last
No,
episode
no, no,
because
it's okay.
then
Yeah.
it's because it's like you forget.
And actually, so what really like grinds my gears is that scientists have the option to make this open access to the public.
Hmm.
They have to pay the journal to make it open access.
Hmm.
So, and it comes to thousands of dollars just to get the public to access your research.
Hmm.
So it's just a really ingrained systematic problem for open access towards these articles, and that's really what I think is one of the main factors as well that
Hmm.
are preventing the public from accessing this research and accessing um, just the primary sources that organizations like the WHO are using to base their statements on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, so sorry, I was distracted by my dog
No,
because
no,
he
no.
was like
It's
looking at the
cool.
door, and I'm like, I don't want him to start barking. I'm recording, dog. Don't do
Yeah.
this to me. Uh, no, but yeah, you are right. It's like they should make this open access pretty much.
Hmm.
Um,
And especially as it comes down to stuff like COVID-19 and
I will
SARS-CoV-2
say that with
spike.
COVID, though, they have been a little bit better
Yes, yeah,
because
yeah.
most of the articles that have been made public,
Hmm.
not from scientific journals and stuff like that, but
Right.
essentially they've, any news article that is behind a paywall essentially
Hmm.
said that regarding COVID, they took that paywall completely off.
Right. No, yeah, like, and I think that's great. Like, it's current, it's great. But in terms of stuff like that affect you personally as well, like if you're going through some diabetes issues,
Hmm.
you have some kidney failure, or if you, or in my case, if you want to learn more about Alzheimer's disease, you still have that paywall
Hmm.
to deal with,
Exactly.
despite the fact that these incidence rates of these diseases are skyrocketing or really high
Yeah.
in the U.S.
So Sandy Booty from the IG live video came out and said, FYI, you can use your VPN to continue accessing science articles post undergrad, but obviously this would be available to everyone. That is a that. I mean, it's not advised,
Just like,
How
just
many
like how
times have
I'm not
people said,
saying, no, seriously, like just how in the same way that I'm not saying you shouldn't go to Sci-Hub or any other bioarchive source to get pre-printed articles on
yeah, oh
PDF.
no, you
No,
shouldn't.
don't.
No, don't do that. I mean, you see that all the time. It's like
Yeah,
they always, VPNs have been
yeah.
advertised like crazy on YouTube. You
Hmm.
can't watch a YouTube
And
channel without,
actually, um, yeah, but
yeah.
no, sorry to just go on this point here. But speaking of these sort of preprints, I think this relates to the whole statement thing that's going on with the WHO that you're about to mention.
Uh huh.
Is that um, a lot of the research being done on COVID-19 is being published, or so the publishing scheme takes a while, months even. I'm
Mhm.
not sure whether this is accelerated because of COVID-19, but a lot of these labs are publishing them through preprints on these servers.
Mhm.
And usually when you're publishing stuff, you want to get it peer reviewed, right? You want to have other people look into it so that, that accountability thing, you want to make sure what you're saying is correct. If you
Mhm.
need to do any additional experiments to further validate what you're saying, yeah, they will tell you.
Mhm.
But if it's being published through a preprint, you don't have that accountability anymore. And that's some of the downsides with these servers.
Yeah.
And usually people like on various social media platforms, they have access to these servers and they'll point to it and say, look at these information here.
Mhm.
For example, the asymptomatic cases or transmission of COVID-19 is, um, well, I mean, I'm sure you'll explain that.
Yeah. So I think that we should probably go into
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Honestly, I didn't think that we would spend almost 30 minutes in the first two questions of it, but if we've talked this much about these first two questions, then let's go ahead and bring up that portion
yeah,
of it.
yeah, yeah.
you know we talked about the accountability held holding people accountable, scientists or spokespeople regarding certain topics, holding them accountable for things that might be misinterpreted or
Mm-hmm.
missaid, or whatever it may be. So we've already explained that scientific literacy is essential. We need to make sure that everything is put out there well enough for the general public to essentially understand what is going on. And right now, more than ever, with COVID-19 going on, it's important. This is a virus that essentially is not even studied. When it
No,
first started coming out, we didn't know the symptoms.
right.
If I recall, um,
And actually, like this related to the WHO. I had a friend who posted something and I commented on it,
mhm,
talking about his concerns about the virus and everything. And he pointed to a tweet from the WHO back in November, telling the public not to worry.
mhm.
And I was stupid and responded back in a snarky way that I regret now because I kind of made the assumption that the science community is this magical unicorn of truth and everything. So,
Just
um,
like any news article that you may read out in public, you always have to take everything with a grain of
yeah.
salt and make sure that you cross reference everything. I
And
think I
also,
mentioned
like,
that in other portions of the podcast as well, in other episodes
hindsight
regarding
is
other stuff.
2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hindsight is 2020. Like, things will change based on the knowledge that change. And um, not only, yeah, like you're saying, it's really important to hold organizations accountable for changed information,
Hmm.
perhaps. Yeah.
So, in regards to COVID,
Hmm.
this was a virus. It's a virus, right? I don't want to say something
Yes,
that.
it's no,
Okay,
no.
I wanted to make
SARS,
sure.
so let me just put it out.
uh
SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. COVID-19 is the disease.
Is the disease. Okay,
Yeah,
so SARS COVID or SARS, what was it?
CoV-2.
CoV-2
SARS-CoV-2. Yeah.
is the virus that essentially is infecting people, and COVID-19 is the name given to the disease, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
then coronavirus is just
Yeah, and
some.
that's what it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
coronavirus is just another umbrella term of the specific class of viruses
Mhm.
out there. So just like how dogs, there's a specific class of dogs.
Mhm.
SARS-CoV-2 is a
It's
specific.
the whole umbrella thing
Yeah.
again. It's
Yeah.
the whole umbrella of trying
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll touch on this. I think we have, but we'll touch. So yeah, there's like differences in the way that public understands this. Like there was this whole debacle about what the hell do we name this thing?
Mhm.
People whether people call it the Chinese virus, whether they wanted to call it coronavirus. It was just um, it was it was a shit show.
It's stuff
Yeah,
that was just kind of like
it's
it's
not
stuff that was
important.
mentioned that wasn't
Yeah,
important to
yeah,
what was going on. Like at that
exactly.
point, it was we don't know any of the symptoms. We're trying to figure out what to do to try to repress the amounts of infections and
Hmm.
those who are actually still infected or have been infected and are in critical condition. Like those were the important things. But at that
Yeah,
time, people were like, "Well, what do we call it? Does it matter? Just I
no,
understand from a scientific perspective, it's
yeah,
important to get the name out there because you need to label it and
right.
understand and
And the science
differentiate
community
itself from
will,
everything else.
yeah, the science community will get hung up on all these pedantic details.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's really what kind of troubles some of the engagement between the two.
Yes.
Like, yeah. So if you want to talk about the WHO statement,
Oh, we will. We're
there's
gonna
yeah,
get there. We're
yeah.
gonna get there
Okay,
right now.
okay,
So we talked about holding certain researchers and scientists
yeah.
accountable for what has been said, and that's
Hmm.
true because you even said it yourself. You look at as a person of science who's doing research in neurobiology, you look at your community as the say it all saints and unicorns of everything. The science
Which is
community is nothing but the truth to you, right? And
oh, hold on, hold on,
wait, let me backtrack.
wait. The scientific process
Uh
is
huh.
something that I hold very dear to me
Okay,
because
not the
that's the
community.
no, no, no.
Okay,
Well, individuals I love, but the community in terms it has its own shit show, and
gotcha.
I think we can
So,
have another episode on this because
oh, we will.
that's
Oh
yeah,
no,
yeah,
trust me, Dom. After
yeah,
this, I think I've have. This is a really fun episode. This is like the nerd side of me coming out talking about this sort of stuff because like I love science. I study science to the point where
yeah,
it's like a hobby to me at this point. Like I love
yeah.
just learning about
Same,
this
same,
sort of
same.
stuff on my own stuff. So on my own time. So no, this stuff is interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah. So sorry to go back on that, but no, WHO.
Going back to WHO. So holding them accountable, pretty much of what was being
Yeah.
said.
Hmm.
It came out closer to the beginning of this month, around June. Uh, we'll say this because I cannot find the article
We'll
in
say
her
a couple
statement.
of weeks ago or something.
A couple weeks ago, at the beginning of June, the leading epidemiologist for WHO, her name is Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, essentially came out with a statement that was translated as asymptomatic individuals uh, is to pass on the virus through an asymptomatic individual is a very rare thing.
Right.
And when that statement came out, a lot of news outlets grabbed onto that and essentially said, well, hold up. You mean to tell me that WHO, at the beginning of this pandemic, was essentially putting out there this fear that everyone needed to wear a face mask, that everyone needed to be 6 feet
Hmm.
apart, that everyone needed to do all these different things to prevent the disease from spreading. And now all of a sudden at the beginning of June, 2 3 months after the whole pandemic thing started, you're backtracking on this.
Right.
Why are you saying that? And literally the next day, on June 8th, June 9th, articles started coming out that Maria Van Kerkhove, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, excuse me, retracted the statement and essentially tried to correct herself and said
Hmm.
that she did not mean to say that asymptomatic symptoms or asymptomatic individuals cannot spread the disease. What she meant to say is that the findings in research that she has and hasn't been published yet essentially shows that asymptomatic individuals have a less likely chance of transmitting the disease than individuals who are pre-symptomatic.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so.
So just to understand,
Mhm,
she's saying that after the infection, a
mhm.
couple of weeks after that, if you're asymptomatic, you have a less likely chance of spreading it
No,
than no, more likely
asymptomatic
chance.
individuals who are holding on to the disease
Right.
but aren't feeling any symptoms. I'm trying to understand it because it's worded.
Yeah.
It's even
Yeah.
if you and I are trying to figure this out, that goes to show pretty much how poorly constructed that whole statement was.
Yeah.
But essentially, from what I've understood, is that asymptomatic individuals are less likely to transmit the disease than
Hmm.
someone who's pre-symptomatic, who
Right.
has the disease but hasn't shown the symptoms
Okay.
yet. So
Right.
pre-symptomatic individuals who essentially will have the disease shown on them, like they will
Hmm.
exhibit the symptoms,
Right. And I can,
com-
yeah.
yeah, compared to someone
Okay.
who is asymptomatic who has the disease and is probably going through it but isn't showing the symptoms at all.
No.
Those individuals are less likely to spread the disease than
Right.
someone who's pre-symptomatic.
And I can
That's
see
yeah,
why the public and all the news articles latched onto this. Um,
it's clickbait.
it is.
It's clickbait. It's an easy thing to essentially say like, wait, excuse me, you mean to tell me that this high up organization that everyone takes, super serious, like the CDC,
Hmm.
the World Health Organization, is actually retracting a statement that they themselves said was correct months ago? Like this doesn't make any sense. Why
Yeah.
why are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
saying this all of a sudden? So that's where the accountability comes in. You have individuals, those, and we're not talking about an experimentation, we're talking about statements made
Yeah.
through
Yeah. Yeah.
findings in research. You have these individuals essentially being held accountable for what was said and what is being distributed out there. Because at this time, and again, I'm going to say it right now more than ever, we need scientific and health literacy to get the information out there to the public. How can you, as an individual, trust organizations like this when they can't even figure out what was being said? It's a difficult thing to try
Yeah.
to.
So I think what one needs to realize is that the people running this organization are people,
Mhm.
right? They have families affected by this disease. They have political pressures coming from powers on high to see whether disease will, try to control the disease and whatnot. Um, yeah, I mean, so the way I've been sort of coping with all of this is just to realize that, yeah, like I said before, hindsight is 2020. Things and research change,
Mhm.
and yeah, like would it's really hard to determine whether you'd withhold information until you know for sure,
Mhm.
or to be precautionary, like send the information out, but take precautionary measures to make sure the things that your worst fears aren't realized.
Mhm.
So I think that's sort of what um they were going about with this, because like I mean I don't know, like I guess would you have wanted the WHO to wait until they have all the information out in June, or would you have wanted a statement with some precautionary measures in it?
Well, see, that's kind of it's not a difficult thing to answer because
Yeah.
I think that in terms of what's going on right now,
Right.
I'm not going to look at this from a research perspective. I can't. I
Hmm.
don't have the
No.
credentials for it, but I will say
No,
that I
neither
can look
do
at it
I.
from you have
Yeah.
more experience in it though
We'll
than
come.
I
We'll
do.
look at it from an individual consumer perspective
Okay.
who are experiencing the crap around us that Orange County is dealing with.
Perfect. Okay, so the way that I look at it from a consumer perspective is it's appreciated that the science community, such as the World Health Organization, is coming out with snippets of information and
Hmm.
essentially keeping us updated. And not just the World Health Organization. I live in LA County. You live in Orange
Yeah.
County, right?
Yeah.
Isn't Orange County still under the LA County thing?
Go on. Go
Okay,
on.
yeah,
I don't know.
whatever. But for LA County, for example, I'm going to speak
Yeah.
for LA County. The mayor, Mayor Garcetti, essentially has had its team, its
Hmm.
COVID-19 team,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
essentially come out with updates daily. And
Hmm.
that was, I think, last month, and it went on for a couple weeks actually, where they would update the public on essentially what was going on, how
Right.
go about all these different things. That's excellent, even though we might not know exactly what's going on and it's all unknown. That
Hmm.
sort of distribution of information is essential, and
Right.
that's why I think that WHO releasing information little by little
Yeah.
and not wait till June until everything is, compiled all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good thing. That's perfectly
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But it is important to understand that your verbiage and how you distribute that
Right.
information is accurate.
And
So,
that's why I says,
mhm,
or why I said and mentioned that scientists should be collaborating with marketing people, people who have experience with public relations,
Mhm.
to know the sort of impact that your verbiage and your use of language has on the public, especially with issues like this COVID-19.
With what's going on.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
there's certain trigger words that the public will look at and essentially say, whoa, 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 hold up, what? And just kind of
Yeah.
divert their attention to that specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So it is important to, have a team behind that. And I think they should, because from what I've been reading, so there's two articles that I opened up. There's an
Right.
article by The Guardian, and there's another article by The Time that I was looking into. The Guardian is very short. It doesn't really explain what and why she backtracked her statement. All it simply said was just kind of like the detailed summary of, oh, well, she backtracked it because, she didn't mean to say what was originally said. She kind of thought that it was, she meant one thing, but it was misinterpreted by something else, and she would like to backtrack that statement and say that this is exactly what she meant. But according to the Guardian article, she's the spokesperson of this. I'm trying to see if I can find it. I don't want to say that the Guardian is the one who said it, but there was an article that I was reading that essentially said that she is the leading epidemiologist, an epidemiologist in WHO, and lead researcher or spokesperson or something like that for the COVID-19 team in
Mm-hmm.
WHO. So if you are the lead communicator for this, you should know, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
You should know what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the mistrust happens. That's where
Oh,
that's in, at least in my opinion, that's where that mistrust happens, because now you have a higher up coming up. Let's say that you and I are on that team, in
right.
that COVID-19 team, right? So we come out and we say, okay, well, you know what? Asymptomatic individuals cannot spread this as badly as pre-symptomatic individuals. But then an article comes out that says, oh, Bryan and Dom essentially say this, and
Right.
everything that was said before by WHO is false. Who can come in to correct that? The lead, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove. She can come in and say, these two researchers that were speaking misinterpreted what we were saying, and essentially this is what's being said. And that's where you gain the trust back. But how do you...
It's hard when you're like the head.
When you're the head
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you make that mistake, because now when you try to retract that statement, now where
You're
does
just
the
gonna
trust
cause
go?
confusion. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's the question that a lot of individuals had. What do you do from there? How do you gain the trust back from WHO? It's a difficult question.
Yeah,
It's a very difficult question.
yeah,
It's a loaded
for
question, actually.
sure.
It's
Okay,
a
what do you think?
what?
What how do you think they'll best go about?
I mean, at
Um,
this point, what happened? She essentially came out the day after, the 2 days afterwards, and essentially said, well, that's not what I meant. I think that the news articles misinterpreted what I was saying, and this is exactly what I meant, that pre-symptomatic individuals are more likely to spread the disease than asymptomatic
mhm.
individuals. And so, I mean, that's the most you can do at this point, especially if you
Yeah.
are the lead for COVID
Epidemiologist
research
yeah, yeah.
at WHO. That's the most you can do. Um, it's difficult because I think, and this is a whole other thing for another episode,
Yeah.
but my opinions on WHO right now are pretty much,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all over the place,
And
because things were said, and
mhm.
there's some stuff that they haven't done well enough, but that's where we have to hold them accountable. And
Yeah.
that's where I think that your idea of cross-referencing and making sure that you're not just getting your stuff from one side is important. You
Right.
have to get it from multiple different
And
sources.
yeah, the Time article that you mentioned says that the statement was based on a preprint, what we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
earlier, getting it from medRxiv.
Mm-hmm.
So
And it's
especially like if you're a government figure trying to navigate through this COVID-19 space, a little bit more hesitancy on publishing preprint research.
and some stuff was coming out from articles or from journals that weren't even published yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So that's where we have to hold them accountable.
yeah.
And I think that it goes back to this whole science and health literacy aspect of it. Who is responsible to distribute this information to the public? When you have someone at WHO, a lead, again, I keep stressing that because it's important,
Yeah.
that couldn't figure out how to properly translate what was being
No.
said to the public.
Yeah. No, for
Because
sure. Like this
Mhm.
instance, I can see in trainings in the future for future science communicators of like
You always have to
what
keep
not
training.
to do.
So
Yeah.
how do we improve on that? I think
Yeah.
that's a good way to end this episode of this podcast, pretty much on health literacy. How do we improve researchers and scientists, the newer generation that's going to be coming in? How can we improve on their distribution, regurgitation, whatever you want to call it, of their findings
So
to the
I
to the
think
public? And hang on,
I have
hold up, Dom.
some. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Not just researchers, but then I'm going to ask you this as well. Who is responsible? Whose responsibility is it to distribute that information to the public?
All right. Just gonna answer the
The first part.
first one.
Okay.
No, the last one because that's the first one I remember right now.
Okay.
Who's responsible? It's oh god. I think
You want to go into a field that's research,
I know.
right?
Yeah.
Or you're
So
in a
I
field of
definitely
research.
Okay, so in the base or like in the front lines, it's definitely the researchers who have this responsibility of communicating their science effectively and make sure like no ambiguous terms or any other way of interpreting it
Mm-hmm.
can be used for misinformation or anything. I think the government, these organizations, have a responsibility of making sure that they have people with the expertise and knowledge of how to market and how to sell this information to the public. Um, and then I think the public has a responsibility to, you know, not take things with a grain of salt. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, it's really easy for someone to just rely on things because he said, she said. It's just based on titles and organizations, like what people were saying with the WHO, right? Just because it's the WHO, it doesn't mean they don't make mistakes.
Mhm.
So it's definitely, I'm gonna say a distributed responsibility in terms of how they can all do better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's given to pretty much everyone. Everyone should be held accountable,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
the researchers, but essentially those people that are studying communications, essentially.
Studying it and like funding it, like the government, or just sort of those who have responsibility to the public to have them know. Everyone has a responsibility to sort of hold this accountable, but also to make sure that they don't take things with a grain of, or not, they don't take things without, I guess, consulting
Gotcha. Now,
for a bit. Yeah.
if you're saying that the responsibility should be held or by everyone, what can these individuals do to improve upon the communication
Right.
of health and sciences to the public?
So I definitely think that you can't do this quickly. Like, it takes time in the same way that it takes time for you to like understand the parts of a car or to understand the parts of um, health sciences. It takes time. And I definitely think that if you, like, as a person outside the science community, if you take time to see and just sort of diversify your social network of people who you follow,
Mm-hmm.
and who you can like sort of somewhat rely on upon for um, this sort of information, it definitely helps.
Mm-hmm.
But that's coming from like an individual standpoint. In terms of education wise,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I definitely think the academia needs to step up in terms of embracing the forms of media that are available to engage the public and communicate the research.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to give my 2 cents in on this
Mhm.
because I do agree with you on certain aspects of it. I think most of it, but I do want to expand on it just a little bit.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I do think that the responsibility should be held by everyone. Um, during my undergrad, I was pretty much told that a lot of researchers who do their experimentations and stuff like that, some of them get really hard-headed and want their theories and hypotheses to be proven true, essentially.
Right.
And
who
they will.
cannot? I mean,
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't all the time, but you have, and they want to replicate the results to their standards over and over
Right.
and over and over again, and that wastes funding, all that other stuff, yada yada yada, science
Yeah.
stuff like that. But the responsibility should be held by everyone. So if you're a researcher and you're trying to do research on a important thing that is going to affect everyone in the public, then understand the benefits and the necessities for your research to exist. This isn't just to prove your name or anything like that. This is essentially information that should be held to or given to the public, especially with something like Corona right now or COVID-19.
Right.
This is stuff that needs to be out there. So if a researcher is going in, I get it. You want your name out there and all this other stuff, but most important thing right now is to make sure that that information gets out there responsibly. And
Mm-hmm.
then individuals who are studying communications, health science communications, or understanding how to create, or studying, excuse me, not understanding, studying um, criteria for education at a high school, elementary, or middle school,
Right.
or college. Like they need to understand how to properly read these journals and dissect it so they can develop proper, avenues to distribute this
Yeah.
information. I mentioned it earlier in the episode. I said, um, Bill Nye the Science Guy was my gateway into sciences, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that we don't have that anymore. When it comes to science for kids, who's the thing that comes to mind?
Right. No, I completely agree.
Yeah,
Like,
it doesn't exist as much anymore.
no.
So,
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, in terms of like early exposure to, I guess, the scientific process
mhm,
and just what the sciences do, it's definitely a lot has changed since that. But I mean, yeah, like I said before, there's different mediums that different scientists are going about to engage these populations and these demographics.
mhm,
Um, there's definitely an effort from the science community to break into that.
mhm.
Yeah.
And so that answers the responsibility portion of it. And then there was the other part, which now I'm completely forgetting. I don't understand why.
What
What
can,
can
yeah,
researchers and those that are regurgitating the information out to the public, what can they do to improve on it? I think
yeah,
it's understanding the
yeah,
platforms.
for sure.
This is something that is honestly been discussed multiple times, at least for my undergrad. I don't know if you're familiar with this whole discussion about how medical technology will always advance at a pace that most hospitals can't progress at.
Hmm.
Are you
No,
familiar
that
with that
makes
or no?
sense. No, but that makes sense to me.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
so essentially for the listeners that aren't really familiar with it, it's you have medical technology available to hospitals, but it's not publicly available yet because it's still being worked on and so on and so forth. But
Hmm.
it also costs a lot of money.
Right.
So
And
then you
that's the one
have,
thing, the main
mhm.
thing. Yeah.
So you have hospitals using last generation, hardware or software, and then they're trying to catch up, and they can't because it costs too much, or they just don't have access to it, so on and so forth. So they can't advance at that pace. It's the same way with education. You have a lot of tools at your disposal, and a lot of individuals aren't able to catch up and understand it.
Right.
So right now, when we think of our generation, you have YouTube, you have the internet, and the internet is expanding and ever changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but then you have tools available. Like, think of it this way, Dom. 10 years ago, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, of course not.
No,
No.
we wouldn't have, because mics at this level that we're using, even though they're, $100 mid tier mics,
Okay, why you gotta call me out on
Hey,
that
no.
right now?
Before the episode, I already told you that your Blue Yeti is essentially the same level as my HyperX mic, except mine is
Yeah,
made
yeah.
for gaming and yours is made for actual talking. But that's what I'm saying is that these $100
Yeah.
mics, 10 years ago would have been stuff that we wouldn't have even have access to.
No,
Um,
and like 10 years ago, research articles were being um published in actual magazines that people had to buy.
hmm
It wasn't it wasn't in the internet. So yeah, the health literacy there was even less. Like people couldn't access the research for themselves 10
No.
years ago.
So everything is changing. And
Yeah.
so I think that right now the scientific community needs to adapt to that.
Hmm.
If you want to properly give out or distribute the information to the public, they need to find a pace that doesn't match the growth of technology, but they do need to find a pace that can make it
Second,
comfortable for them and for the public.
yeah.
So that's
Basically, they need to
my
catch
belief
up.
on it. Yeah, they
No,
need
for
they need to
sure.
catch up. They can't just be,
Yeah.
and that has to do with the last generation not being able to adapt to it or not wanting to.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different variables,
No,
but that's
honestly,
my
like,
belief.
and on a positive note, to hopefully sort of conclude things, is that there is a large movement to expand um, the way science is being distributed, being
Mm-hmm.
engaged with the public. It's a large movement. Like I think that, and I don't mean to be so blunt here, but as the older generation leave, I the younger generation definitely is like pushing things to the newer
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
boundaries. Like um, I know so many graduate students who are utilizing like medium like Twitter. I one of my great close friends utilizes TikTok to communicate science.
There's a lot
And
of that going on right now.
yeah, and like yeah, there are people that are these creative people who are, pushing the boundary of sort of public engagement.
Uh-huh.
And not only that, I think it's also important that um, the science community sort of collaborates with the communities that they're trying to, affect. Like if you have a scientist who's going to um, deal with the Zika virus
Mhm.
outbreak, they better know Spanish
Yeah.
or,
Mhm.
collaborate with the communities that are being affected by this. I was actually reading an article for all this about how the language that you
All the
use,
language barrier
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
can change. Like here in Mexico or in LA, people have been using um, the word, the Spanish word for risk,
Mhm.
um, in a way that doesn't hold that emotional connotation. And so scientists have been using risk and like a direct translation of risk, but to be able to like work different languages to really communicate the um, cultural, um, the emotional weight of that in terms of the culture is definitely something that science needs to work on. So now researchers, instead of using risk, they're using dangers
Mhm.
because that holds more of a weight than just um, a direct translation there.
Of course. Of
Yeah.
course. I think we've exhausted this. And to add, I think that we just figured out what the next topic could be when I bring you on this podcast again.
Oh yeah,
Technology in
yep,
science.
for sure. Like,
There we go.
hmm and I've like, as I was preparing for this, there was just like a bunch of things. I was like, I don't want to talk about this with him too, because like, there's a topic about science being whether it's political or not, and I think
Oh,
that's the kind of
yes.
thing that's like, yeah, that will be perfect for this podcast.
Oh man. Oh my god. Dom, I love you. Thank you. That's the stuff I want to talk about. So,
Yeah,
listeners,
like
look
hills
forward
that
to
I
that.
will die on are these kind of topics. So yeah, we'll
Oh man, I'm gonna write all this
talk about
down at
it.
the end of this episode, and
Yeah,
we're gonna keep in touch, buddy. I'm gonna probably bring you back within the next couple of weeks just to talk
for
about this.
sure.
Just yeah, this
Yeah.
is great. This is
Um,
fantastic.
yeah, and so actually what I wanted to plug in is that
Go for it.
I can perhaps like come up with a Google Docs of references for
hmm
people to go through, links that are open access or totally not downloaded from a VPN that will give to the public or anything.
Oh no, yeah, because
But
VPNs, no,
but
no, no.
yeah, I can come up with like a Google Docs of things that your listeners can like peruse some readings
hmm
that I think are pretty accessible to non-scientists in terms of this exact conversation, in terms of science communication and accountability, particularly health.
hmm
But yeah,
Okay, that
yeah,
I would greatly appreciate that, and I'll put
for
those in the
sure.
description below as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll get you
So
that.
quick or little conclusion that I'm gonna do right now. We were recording this on Friday, and Dom had the brilliant idea of doing a IG live video. We were both I think, what is it, dual sharing or whatever it's called,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
or
or
co-streaming or
whatever.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
that video died like
it did,
15
but
minutes
that's okay.
ago. Yeah,
We
it's
still
okay. We
have
still
this.
rolled with the punches, whatever. But it was a great idea. So I think I might
Yeah,
actually start implementing that with some other people I bring in. So
for
Dom,
sure.
I thank you for that
Yeah, no
idea.
problem.
But Dom, we'll go ahead, plug in. You'll send me those links, and I'll put those in the
Yes.
description below. Do you want to plug in anything for yourself, where maybe people can
Um,
find you?
yeah, so I'm on Instagram at DamoJavoBean,
hmm
V with a capital V. He'll put it on the text or something. But
Yeah.
I'm mostly, if you really want to know more about the science community and the young generation that is sort of leading the next field, I'm also on Twitter as well, DJ Neuron Nerd, because obviously.
As a
um,
neurobiologist.
yeah. But no, yeah, like a lot of my retweets, a lot of my followers, they are grad students, they're young professors, they're undergrads too, um, that have thoughts. And usually, so like, I don't know if this is sort of a bad thing, but most of my information has come from Twitter, basically because most of the science community that I'm connected to
hmm
is on Twitter. So like sharing that opinions and sharing those thoughts is important to me, and especially in terms of what's been going on. Um, the past weeks with the police brutality and with COVID-19, the news media can interpret things differently, and I feel like Twitter has a more raw perspective.
They have a lot of different articles
Yeah.
that you can look up and
Yeah.
different perspectives and stuff. So
Yeah.
and you're very active on Twitter as well. So I'll go
Yeah.
ahead and post your socials in the description
For
below.
sure.
That's on the YouTube channel. Quick little conclusion on my side. If you are listening on Spotify, in the description there will be a link to the YouTube channel where I also upload these every Friday at noon. You can go and click on that link, give me a subscribe, and that way you can keep up to date with all the podcasts and some other content that I'm working on. I've just been kind of lazy to do it, but it'll be up there. It'll be not just serious podcast stuff discussions,
Yeah.
but it'll be more like, fun stuff that I want to work on. So that'll be all up on there. And if you're listening to the YouTube side, in the description below, there's a link that links you over to the Spotify channel. Give me a follow there. And that way you can listen to those at ease using Spotify rather than YouTube, because I know YouTube has that YouTube premium stuff. And if you don't have it, you can't listen while your phone is off. So give me a follow on Spotify. Give me a subscribe on YouTube. I'll also link some socials in the description below as well. Other than that, Dom, I think that about concludes everything. Am I missing anything from your side, or are you good?
No, we're good. Yeah.
We're good. We got your
Yeah.
plugins. I've got my plugins. It was good, and
Hopefully we'll do this again soon.
yeah. Oh, definitely. I will bring you back. Hopefully within July, maybe. It's closer to the end of June anyway. So yeah, definitely.
My
'Cause I do
people
want-
will talk to your people.
Oh,
Which will be good.
my people, keep an eye for my people. They'll be in
Yeah.
touch with you.
Okay,
And if you
for
listeners
sure.
were interested in actually listening or want something like maybe a live recording of this, we can, let me know. I can go ahead and have some other people come in and stream this on their IG lives, or I can find some other platform to stream this live, and that way you can listen to the podcast as they're being recorded rather than wait every Friday at noon, because this is coming out literally a week after we've had the discussion, and hopefully nothing changes. Knock on wood. Everything stays the same. Yes.
I just want to add one thing.
Yes.
So today is Friday, June 19th.
Yes.
It is Juneteenth.
Yes.
So I would like to encourage your listeners to follow, especially in this topic, follow Black scientists on social media, see what they have to say, listen to them. The science community is plagued with microaggressions and racism, so their input is just as important.
It is.
Especially from the Black science
100%. So this won't come out on Juneteenth, but it will be up a week afterwards. And regardless of it not being the day, I stand 100% for advocating and educating individuals about this sort of stuff. I'll be honest, I've been trying my best as well to learn about these sorts of things as well. So one, I appreciate you bringing that up as well, Dom. All of that, please be aware and just know that this is important things to talk about and to make sure that we bring it up. So thank you, Dom, for bringing that up.
No, for sure.
Even if it's a week afterwards, does not matter. It is still important. A week, a month, a year from now, whatever it is, it's
because
still
why
important.
not? Why not?
Why not? Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, we got to close this because I'm sure you're going too long.
It's an hour and 10. I don't think this is the longest episode I've had.
Okay,
It's a little under. But thank you, Dom, for being on this episode. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to this episode of Drinking Matters. My name is Bryan. This was Dom. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.